They built a garage that hung over my driveway like it owned the place, and then they told me it wasn't a big deal. I remember standing there, looking up at that roof cutting into my space, and thinking, this is either going to end quietly or it's going to end badly. Turns out, it didn't end the way they expected. It's been living in that house for almost a decade at that point, out in a quiet part of Willow Creek, the kind of neighborhood where people wave even if they don't know you, where nothing really changes unless someone paints their mailbox a different color. My place sat on a corner lot. Nothing fancy, but it had one thing I cared about. A long gravel driveway that ran along the side of the house and stretched all the way back to a detached garage. Now that driveway, that was mine. Always had been. The previous owner next door, an older guy named Arthur. He knew it, respected it, never once tried to push the line. We'd even joked about it once over beers. Him saying, that strip right there, that's your kingdom, and I guess, in a small way, it was. Then Arthur sold the house. Spring rolled in, and with it came the new neighbors, the Harrisons. Young couple, mid-30s maybe. 2 kids, a golden retriever that barked at everything. At first, they seemed all right, friendly enough, the kind of people who smile a lot but don't really listen. You know the type. The husband, David, shook my hand the first day and said, "We're excited to make this place ours." I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone says that, but about 3 weeks in, things started shifting. I noticed trucks pulling up early in the morning, lumber being unloaded, guys in hard hats walking the property line like they were mapping out a battlefield. One afternoon, I wandered over, hands in my pockets. Just curious, and David told me they were building a second garage, said he needed more space, tools, bikes, maybe a workshop. I nodded, said, "Sounds good," but something about where they were pointing didn't sit right with me. It looked close, too close. Still, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was just the angle. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then one morning, about a week later, I backed my SUV out like I always did, and my side mirror came within an inch of one of their support beams. I actually hit the brakes and just sat there for a second, heart doing that little jump it does when something almost goes wrong. I got out of the car and looked up. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The edge of their garage roof wasn't just near my driveway, it was hanging over it by a lot, not a couple inches, not something you could brush off. It looked like 4, maybe 5 feet of overhang, casting a shadow straight onto my gravel like it belonged there. And I remember thinking, no way, there's no way they didn't know. So I walked over, calm, at least on the outside. David was out there with one of the contractors holding a coffee, pointing at something on a blueprint. I waited until he noticed me, gave a little nod. "Hey," I said, trying to keep it casual, "that garage. It looks like it's coming over my driveway." He glanced at it, then back at me, and gave this short little laugh, like I'd just told a harmless joke. No, he said, waving his hand. The contractor measured everything. "We're good." I didn't laugh. "Did you get a survey done?" I lied. He shrugged. "Builder handled all that." Then he took a sip of his coffee and added, almost as an afterthought, "I mean, it's just a few feet. You can still get in and out, right?" And that was the moment something shifted for me. Not the garage, not the overhang. Him saying that. Like my property line was just a suggestion. Like access was good enough, even if ownership wasn't respected. I nodded slowly, like I was processing it, but inside, I was already making a decision. "All right," I said. "I'll double-check on my end." He smiled, like that settled it. "Yeah, go for it." I walked back to my house, but I didn't go inside right away. I stood there in the driveway, looking at that roof hanging over my space, imagining every possible future. Scraped vehicles, blocked access, arguments that would drag on for years, and I realized something simple. If I didn't deal with this now, it was never going to get better. So the next morning, I made a call. Not to David, not to the contractor. I called a surveyor. And I remember thinking as I hung up, if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. No big deal. But if I'm right, well, then this wasn't going to end quietly after all. The surveyor showed up 2 days later. Right. Around noon, driving this dusty white truck with faded lettering on the side like it had seen 100 property disputes before mine. His name was Marcus, late 50s maybe. Quiet, steady kind of guy. The type who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. He stepped out, looked around once, then at me, and said, "So somebody built where they shouldn't have." Like he already knew the answer. I gave a small shrug. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He nodded, grabbed his equipment, and got to work. Now, if you've never watched a proper land survey happen, it's not dramatic, not at first. It's slow, methodical, almost boring if you don't know what you're looking at. But to me, every step felt like something tightening, like a knot being pulled just a little bit tighter with each measurement. Marcus walked the perimeter, checked old markers, referenced county records on his tablet, muttered numbers under his breath, like he was speaking a language only he understood. Every now and then, he'd glance up at the garage, then back down at his equipment, and each time he did, I felt that same quiet confirmation building. About an hour in, he stopped near the edge of my driveway, knelt down, and drove a bright red stake into the ground with a small hammer. The sound, sharp, deliberate, echoed more than it should have. Then he stood up, looked at me, and said, "You might want to take a walk with me." We moved together along the line he was marking, one red stake at a time, forming a boundary that suddenly felt very real, very undeniable. And when we reached the part where their garage sat, he didn't say anything at first. He just pointed. The corner of that structure, it wasn't close to the line. It wasn't even touching it. It was over by about 4 feet, and the roof. That extended even farther, close to 5. I let out a slow breath, one of those you don't realize you've been holding. "So, I'm not crazy." Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. That's a clear encroachment." Clear there was. Something about that word that hit different. Not maybe. Not arguable. Clear, I thanked him, paid him, and before he left, he handed me a printed report along with a digital copy. Clean, official, impossible to ignore. That evening, I took photos. Every angle I could think of. The stakes, the measurements. The garage corner cutting across the line like it didn't belong to reality. I even took a shot from inside my SUV showing how tight the clearance had become. Then I printed everything out. The next morning, I walked over and slipped the envelope into their mailbox. No note, no drama, just facts. And then I waited. 1 day passed. Nothing. 2 days. Still nothing. By the 3rd day, I knew exactly what kind of situation this was turning into. Not a misunderstanding, a decision. They'd seen the evidence, and they were choosing to ignore it. So I walked over again. This time, when I knocked, it took a while before the door opened. David stood there, but he didn't have that friendly smile anymore. His expression was flat. Almost annoyed. "Yeah," he said. I held up the papers. "You get these." He barely glanced at them. "Yeah, and?" He sighed, leaned against the doorframe like I was already asking too much. "Look, tearing down part of the garage, that's not happening. It cost a lot of money." I felt something in my chest tighten, but I kept my voice even. "It's on my property." He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "It's a few feet. You've still got space." That same line again. I nodded slowly, then pointed toward my driveway. I can't get larger vehicles through anymore. I can barely maneuver as it is. He glanced past me like he was humoring the idea for half a second, then said, "You'll figure it out." And there it was. Not just dismissal, but expectation. like I was supposed to adapt to his mistake. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I said, "All right." No arguing. No raised voice. Just that one word. And I walked away. Now, I'll be honest. Part of me wanted to escalate right then and there. Call a lawyer, file something official, drag it into court. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Legal battles take time. Months, sometimes years. And in the meantime, I'd still be dealing with that garage hanging over my driveway every single day. I didn't want a long fight. I wanted a solution. So I went digging. Property records, zoning rules, access laws, anything that might apply. Nights turned into hours of reading through documents that felt like they were written to confuse people on purpose. But eventually, something clicked. My driveway wasn't shared. It wasn't an easement for both properties. It was entirely on my land, fully mine, which meant I had control over how it was used. All of it. And that's when the idea came to me. Not all at once. Not like some lightning bolt, but slowly, piece by piece, until it formed into something simple, elegant, and completely unavoidable. If they wanted to treat my driveway like it didn't matter, then I'd remind them exactly where it started and where it stopped. A few days later, I made another call. This time, to a metalwork company across town. I explained what I needed, kept it straightforward. To steel posts, one heavy crossbar. Installed at the entrance of my driveway, solid, permanent. The guy on the phone asked, height clearance. I paused for a second, picturing their garage, the overhang, the exact point where it dipped just a little too low. Then I said, 7 feet. There was a brief silence, like he was doing the math in his head. All right, he said finally. We can do that. We scheduled it for the following week. And I didn't tell David. Didn't warn him. Didn't hint at it. Because at that point, I wasn't interested in another conversation. I was interested in results. The morning they showed up, I was already outside, coffee in hand, watching the truck pull in. Same feeling as before, but this time, I wasn't the one. Being caught off guard, the crew got to work immediately, marking the entrance, digging deep holes on either side of the driveway. Gravel, dirt, the sound of shovels hitting ground. It all felt strangely satisfying. It didn't take long for the Harrisons to notice. Their front door opened, and both David and his wife stepped out, looking confused at first, then concerned. David walked over, quick steps. Eyes moving from the workers to me. "What's going on?" he asked. I took a sip of my coffee, set the cup down on the hood of my car, and said, as calmly as I could, installing a clearance bar. A what? A height restriction for vehicles entering my driveway. He frowned. Why? I met his eyes, just held it there for a second, to protect access to my garage. There was a pause, just long enough for it too starts sinking in. Behind us, the workers lifted the steel crossbar into place. And as it rose, you could almost see the realization hit him. You could actually watch it land on his face, that slow shift from confusion to calculation, and then finally to something a little heavier, realization. Not the kind where someone admits they messed up, but the kind where they suddenly understand the rules. Have changed, and they're not the ones setting them anymore. The crew didn't stop. He worked like David wasn't even there, guiding that thick black steel bar into place, bolts tightening, metal settling into position with that deep final sound that says, "This isn't temporary." David took a step closer, looking up at the bar, then over at his garage, then back at me. 7 feet, he said, like he needed to hear it out loud. Right around there, I said, casual, like we were discussing fence paint. That's low. For some vehicles, I replied. Another pause, longer this time, because now he was doing the math. His garage overhang, the part that crossed into my property, sat lower than that bar. Not by a huge margin, but enough. Enough that anything taller than a standard sedan, a truck, a van, even some SUVs would have to think twice before coming anywhere near that angle. And the way his driveway lined up with the alley behind his house. The only clean turning path into that garage cut right across my driveway entrance. It always had. It was subtle, but necessary. Without that extra space, the turn got tight, real tight. Now, it wasn't just tight. It was blocked. David turned back to me, his voice sharper now. "You can't just do this." I tilted my head slightly. "It's my driveway." "That's not the point." "It kind of is." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a small circle like he was trying to find the right argument, the right angle that would make this stop. "You're making it impossible to use our garage." I didn't answer right away. I just let that sentence sit there between us for a second. Let him hear it himself. Then I said, "Interesting." He stopped pacing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "you've built part of your garage over my property, and now you're upset because you can't use it properly." His jaw tightened. "We can still use it." "Maybe," I said. Carefully, behind us, my SUV rolled forward as one of the workers tested the clearance. It passed under the bar, clean, no issue. Smooth, designed that way. David watched it, then looked back at his garage again, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have anything to say. The crew finished up about 20 minutes later, packed their tools, gave me a nod, and drove off, leaving that black steel bar standing there like a line drawn in permanent ink. And just like that, everything changed. Over the next few days, I didn't have to do much. I just observed. The first attempt came the very next morning. David backed his pickup truck down the alley, lined it up with the garage, then stopped. Sat there for a minute, engine idling, staring at the angle. He tried once, slow, cautious, turning the wheel, inching forward. But the moment he approached the driveway entrance, it was obvious. The clearance bar forced him into a tighter path, and that overhang, it hung there like a warning. He backed up, tried again, same result. Eventually, he parked on the street. Second attempt came later that week. With a delivery van, that one didn't even try. The driver stepped out, looked at the bar, looked at the garage, then just shook his head and carried the boxes by hand. After that, the garage became something else entirely. Not a garage. Storage, I'd see the door open occasionally, boxes stacked inside, bikes leaned against the wall, but a vehicle. Almost never. And when they did try, it was always small, careful, tense, like threading a needle that didn't need to be there in the first place. 2 weeks passed like that, and then one evening, just as the sun was starting to drop behind the houses, there was a knock on my door. I already knew who it was. David stood there, but this time, he looked different. Not defeated, exactly, but quieter, less certain, like he'd spent the last 14 days replaying every decision that led up to this. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a brief silence, the kind where both people know why they're there, but neither one wants to say it first. Then he cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. "Sure." He glanced toward the driveway, toward the bar, then back at me. "This situation, it's not working." I folded my arms loosely. I noticed he exhaled slow. "Look, I get it. The survey, the property line. Maybe we should have handled that differently. Maybe I didn't say it out loud, but I let it hang there." He continued. "But tearing down part of the garage, that's a big deal. It's expensive." I nodded once. "It is?" Another pause. Then, finally, he said it. "What would it take to fix this?" There it was. Not a demand. Not a dismissal. A question. And here's the thing. I thought about that moment more than once. What I'd say if we ever got here. I didn't want to drag it out. Didn't want to win some endless back and forth. I just wanted my property respected, so I kept it simple. You move the garage, I said. Fully off my property. No overhang, no corner. Nothing crossing the line. He stared at me, searching. For me, maybe a compromise. Maybe a loophole. And then, he asked. Then I take down the bar. Straight, clean, fair. He looked past me again, toward that black steel beam, like it had suddenly become the most expensive piece of metal he'd ever seen. That's it. That's it. Another long silence. I could almost hear the numbers running through his head. The cost of rebuilding, the time, the hassle, versus living with a garage he couldn't really use. Finally, he nodded, slow, reluctant, but real. All right, he said. We'll fix it. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, the fight was. The actual work took another few weeks. Contractors came back. Sections were cut, adjusted, rebuilt. It wasn't pretty for a while. Half-finished beams, exposed framing. But eventually, the structure shifted. Back where it should have been all along. Clear of my property. When it was done, I called the same crew back. They unbolted the crossbar. Off, and just like that, my driveway was open again. No drama. No ceremony, just space. Where there should have been space from the beginning, now. Every now and then, I'll see David pull into that garage without any trouble. Clean turn. No hesitation. It works. The way it was supposed to, and we're civil, not friends. Probably never will be, but we nod. We keep things simple. Boundaries clear, visible. Respected, but I still think about it sometimes. Because? Here's the part that sticks with me. If I hadn't pushed back, if I just accepted that few feet, like it didn't matter, then what? Does it become 3 feet next time? 5. A fence, shed, something else creeping over the line until the line doesn't mean anything anymore. Or maybe some people would say I went too far, that I could have handled it differently, been more patient, more flexible. I don't. No. All I know is this. Respect doesn't usually show up on its own. Sometimes you have to build it. So here's what I'm curious about. What would you have done? Would you have taken the legal route and waited it out? Or done exactly what I did? And where do you draw the line between standing your ground and escalating a situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you enjoy stories like this, real situations with real consequences, hit like, subscribe to HOA Conflicts, and stick around. Because trust me, not all neighbor disputes end this clean.